pals, I'm here today to talk about the books I have currently borrowed from the library. I did a book haul, like a library book haul a few weeks ago, and I've either read those books and returned them, DNF'd those books and returned them, or not yet read them. I have 4 that I have not yet read that I still have out because I still want to read them, but I now have another maybe 15 out that I also want to read. My limit to borrow from the library is 20 books. I currently have 19 books out and I have 14 other books on hold that are going to keep coming in. So this is pretty much my May TBR. I need to speed through these books so that I can continue to borrow all the other books that are coming in, a lot of which are new releases that I featured in my last most anticipated releases video, which I'll link above. So yeah, I'm just going to crack on because there's a lot to be getting on with. The first few are paperback, although I think they're relatively newish releases in the last few years. The first one is the only short story collection I currently have borrowed, and that is Alligator and Other Stories by Dima Al-Zayat. My library does this strip thing. I don't know if you can see that where it says it's a short story. I've never actually seen that on other books, but it is pretty handy if they do that on other books, so I will keep an eye out. So yeah, this came out a couple of years ago, I think, and I heard a lot of people talk about it and really recommend it. I didn't really have any idea what the collection was about, but I thought, you know what, I will give it a go. It says that this collection offers snapshots of moments when unusual circumstances suddenly distinguish us from our neighbours, when our difference is thrown into relief. Here, a dangerous woman transgressing missing children in 1970s New York, a family who were once Syrian but have now lost their name, and a young woman about to discover that the American dream is not open to all. And I think at the centre of this collection, there is the story Alligator, which is like a compilation of different voices. So maybe like a collection within a collection, which sounds intriguing. So there we go. And now I have 4 paperback novels. The first one is a super popular one I saw loads of people talk about, and that is The Death of Vivek OG by Koiki Emezi. I read one of their books last year, You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty, and I really enjoyed it. And so I thought I would go back in their catalogue and pick this one up. And I think this is about Vivek OG, who, when the novel opens, has already died. And you sort of go back in time to see what their childhood was like in Nigeria and what their relationship is like with their parents and why they may have died. And I heard loads of people say this is one of their favourite reads of the year they read it. So there's that one. Completely different one, again, that came out a couple of years ago and maybe even just last year, and I've had on my radar since it came out. That is Dreamland by Rosa Rankin Gee. I have enjoyed reading sort of dystopian, post-apocalyptic type fiction, although I haven't read much in the last few years. I guess most of you can probably guess why. I feel like I may be ready to read it again. And I have been drawn to this one in particular because I find that a lot of post-apocalyptic dystopian fiction is not set in the UK. And I think it makes it all the more terrifying when it's set somewhere more familiar to you. This is set in Margate in Kent. I lived in Kent for a few years. That's where I studied for my degree, and so I sort of know the area. And the premise of this is set in the not too distant future, when sea levels are rising so much that they are trying to evict poorer people from London and send them to live on the coasts that are sort of being flooded. And so we follow this family, and in particular this young girl called, I think, Chance, as her and her family are sent off to Margate, and London is sort of becoming this place where only millionaires and billionaires live, and it's about what happens to them when they're there. I think I'm really going to enjoy the tone of this, so yeah, also hoping this is a real page turner because it is a little bit chunkier than most of the other books I've got. A lot of these aren't very long, which is going to help me get through them quick enough, hopefully. This is one that's been out for a few years, and I've meant to pick this up since it came out. This was longlisted for the Dylan Thomas Prize in 2021, and I've wanted to read this author's work since then. That is the Wild Laughter. I have not looked up how you say that first name. I'm not going to attempt it because it's Irish and I'll definitely butcher it, because a lot of Irish names do not read how they're spelled, but I'm sure however you pronounce it is beautiful, and I will definitely learn that when I read the book, because I'm planning on audiobooking this along with the physical book. And there's certain types of books I plan to do that with. They tend to be books where the accent matters. I'm rubbish at accents, so I can't really imagine them in my head. And also, if a book is really lyrically and beautifully written, I still want to read it on the page so I can still admire how a sentence was structured. So I'm planning to do that with this one. It says it's 2008 and the Celtic tiger has left devastation in its wake. Brothers Hart and Cormac Black are waking up to a very different island, one that widens the chasm between them and brings their beloved father to his knees. Facing a devastating choice that will put their livelihood, even their lives, on the line, the brothers soon learn that the biggest danger comes when there is nothing to lose. And I love family dramas, but I realised when I was looking into this, I haven't read many family dramas where the siblings are all brothers. Like, I've read a lot of family dramas where there's either all sisters or a mixture. And so, yeah, I think it would be interesting to sort of look at the brotherly relationship more than just the sibling relationship in general. So there is that one. This next one I've had quite a few people talk about, and I really hope I like it. I don't always do well with the sort of like messy woman novel. A lot of time when there are characters, when I just don't understand their motivations and I sort of want to shake them and be like, why are you making that choice? I find them quite difficult to read. But from what I've heard of this one, I'm hoping it'll be one that works for me. And that is the brilliantly titled Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead by Emily Austen. This sounds and is sort of compared to Fleabag, which I loved, as many of us did. And this is about a young woman who's in her 20s. It says she's an atheist, animal-loving lesbian, and she cannot stop ruminating about death. She responded to a leaflet for free therapy at a local Catholic church, and when she gets there, she's greeted by the father, who thinks she is being interviewed for a new job, and so she sort of goes along with it and ends up being, I think, like an office administrator. And she's trying to hide the fact that she is an atheist lesbian to all the people she's working with at the Catholic Church. But yeah, it just sort of follows what happens as she gets to know these people and doesn't want to sort of break the bad news to them. So I think it's going to be sort of funny, but also full of real emotions. And I'm really hoping I will enjoy it, mainly because I love that title. The next one is similar sort of like messy woman type novel. This is a super popular one that I know loads of people loved, and that is Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. I borrowed this from the library last year and just had to return it before even attempting to read it because I had too many books out. I actually picked this up the other day when I went to the library and borrowed it. I was going to a cafe and so I decided to start this one. So I'm actually 80 pages in. It was really easy to read, so I feel like this is going to be a really quick read. However, I am temporarily putting this down for a couple of weeks because in April, I keep wanting to say March, in April, I read 2 or 3 novels and 1 memoir that are all but one are about women, one was about a man, who are like in their like 20s, 30s and don't have a sort of great life. Something messy is happening, perhaps with a romantic relationship, and they are looking back on their sort of childhood and teen years to sort of see how they got to where they are today. And in those childhood and teen years, there's quite a few like eccentric characters around them. And that is effectively what this is. And all of those novels have been based in the UK, as is this one, which I didn't realise. For some reason, I thought this was American. I think Meg Mason is actually Australian. Is she Australian? Or am I just making this up? Yes, or she lives in Sydney, but maybe she's British. Tell me down below. So this is set in the UK, at least the part I've read, and right now I feel like I'm not admiring it as much as I should be because I've read a couple of novels very similar. So I'm going to take a break. I will be going back to it because I did find it very readable and I know so many people loved it. And the next 3 are all written by men, which is quite unusual for me. I don't tend to read many novels written by men, but yeah, just happened this way. I heard people talk about these books, thought they sounded intriguing. The first one is Here Again Now by Akacheyu Nzelu. I hope I pronounced that correctly. This, I think, is going to be a really devastating book. So let me know if you've read it and like this was really upsetting, because I may have to wait until I'm feeling in high spirits to read it. My understanding is that this is set in London and it is about a young black man who is starting a sort of successful acting career. And at the same time, he gets his father to move in with him because his father is struggling. And then he reconnects with a friend who he previously had I'm not sure if they previously had a relationship or they start a relationship. But it says, but after a magical night when they come within a hair's breadth of admitting their feelings for each other, a devastating event rips all 3 men apart. And in the aftermath, they have to try and rebuild. And although they have never truly understood each other, grief may bring them both the peace and happiness they've been searching for. So yeah, hoping I will really love this one. Has loads of really great blurbs on the back. It says, tender and honest, pulsing with love, and Zulu is the future of Black British writing. So there's that one. And this next one I feel like I'd heard about but hadn't really heard anyone talk about it, but I recently stumbled across Brett's channel, which I'll link above, and really love the way he talks about books. He talks about quite a lot of American books that I haven't really heard many other people talk about, and this was one of them, and that is The Town of Babylon by Alejandro Varela. I love this cover, I think it's super punchy and eye-catching. Really happy that my library had a copy of this. This is only published in the US. My library has a small section where they buy mainly US non-fiction, but also some fiction. And so yeah, very happy to get hold of this one. So this is about a man who is an academic, and he is coming to the end of a 20-year marriage because he has found out his husband has been having a lot of affairs. His father is ill, so he goes home. And when he goes home, he ends up attending his high school reunion, and that sort of creates this cascade of moments, because it says that he finds out that his first love is now married with 2 children after having been incarcerated and recovering from addiction. Paul, whom Andre has long suspected of having killed a man in a homophobic attack, is now an evangelical minister and father of 5. And Simone, Andre's best friend, is in a psychiatric institution following a diagnosis of schizophrenia. During this brief visit home, Andre confronts these relationships, the death of his brother, and the many sacrifices their parents made to offer them a better life. A novel about the essential nature of community and maintaining one's own health, The Town of Babylon is an intimate portrait of queer, racial and class identity, a call to re-evaluate the ties of societal bonds and the systems in which they are forged. I think that sounds amazing, so cannot wait to read this one. And the next one, I don't think I have to say much about. When this initially came out, I was a little bit intrigued, but didn't really think I was gonna pick it up. And then I heard more and more people talk about it who have quite similar reading taste to me, and I was like, do you know what? It does sound really interesting and really unique, and that is Trust by Hernan Diaz. So my understanding, initially, what didn't draw me in is that it says this is set in 1920s New York, and we follow a legendary Wall Street tycoon and his wife, who is the daughter of eccentric aristocrats. And I was like, I don't really know if I'm interested by that story. I tend to prefer reading stories about working class people than super wealthy people. But it says that story is actually the centre of a novel called Bonds, which was a 1937 novel that all of New York seemed to have read. And then I think you have some other narratives, and they're all pulled together, and it says this is a brilliant literary puzzle, engages the reader in a quest for the truth while confronting the deceptions that often live at the heart of relationships, the reality warping force of capital, and the ease with which power can manipulate facts. I have no idea what to expect, but I'm intrigued by the literary puzzle bit and the fact that it's a little bit meta. I don't think I'm going to have read anything like this, so I could really not like it, really not get on with it. I'm going to give it a go, and I would love to know your thoughts if that's one you've read. Then on to the non-fiction, another one I have borrowed before, but I don't know if I ever mentioned it to you on a video before. But yeah, I borrowed this last year and didn't read it in time, so I had to return it. I borrowed it because I heard Chris over at Chris's Bookish Cauldron do a review on this book, but also an interview with the author, and he just completely sold this book to me. And that is The Last Days, a memoir of faith, desire and freedom by Ali Miller. This is a memoir about the fact that the author was raised in the UK as a Jehovah's Witness, I think by her single mother, and she had a very unique childhood. She was raised to believe that the end of days was coming in her lifetime, so it was a very sort of fearful, oppressive childhood. And this is written, I don't know if there's a term for this, but when a memoir is written so that there isn't self-reflection, when she's talking about being 13, she'll write it like she was 13 and the thoughts she would have had then, so that you can understand how somebody would have sort of bought into this lifestyle, right? Because they wouldn't have had this knowledge she now has as an older person outside of the faith. So yeah, it says that it is 1982, and in the Kingdom Hall, we are Jehovah's Witnesses. The state of the world shows us the end is close, and Satan is like a roaring lion seeking to devour us. Chris said this was just amazingly written and really readable. And I find that a lot of these memoirs about people who were in quite strict religious groups tend to come out of the US. It's not that common, I think, to have one that's UK based, so I'm very intrigued by that. The next one I've also borrowed before, but I had to return because there's loads of people waiting for this one, so I need to read it this time very quickly, and that is What My Bones Know, a memoir of healing from complex trauma by Stephanie Fu. I can tell by these books like which ones have been borrowed the most. This one and Sorrow and Bliss have like really messy, puckered library covering on them, so I think they're probably the most well read out of all of these books. This memoir is being massively celebrated. Stephanie Fu is somebody who suffers from complex PTSD, which is, before I butcher what the meaning of that is, a condition that occurs when trauma happens continuously over the course of years. So she looks back on the history of her childhood. She had a really difficult upbringing, hence the complex PTSD, but she also looks into survivors of trauma and how complex PTSD develops. She talks to professionals, psychiatrists. She looks into different types of therapy for complex PTSD. So this is supposed to be a memoir that also looks into the condition and discusses the idea of memory, trauma, and the way in which a body can sort of physically carry trauma as well as mentally, which are things I'm deeply interested in and always want to know more about. So I'm interested in all of them, I keep saying it. The next one is one I've already started reading, although I'm only 40 pages in, so I can't say much, is The Third Rainbow Girl, The Long Life of a Double Murder in Appalachia by Emma Copley Eisenberg. This came out a couple of years ago. I heard Kendra talk about this on the Reading Woman podcast, and I've wanted a copy since then. However, this is only published in the US, it's really expensive and difficult to get hold of, so I've never bought it because it has really mixed reviews on Goodreads, and so if I'm going to spend a lot of money on a book, I want to be pretty sure I'm going to like it, because it's gutting when you spend loads of money and then within 20 pages you're like, oh, this is a DNF. I checked before to see if my library had a copy and they didn't, but when I was browsing the other day I just stumbled across it, so they must have bought this quite recently. Now, I've mentioned a few times on the channel, I'm not a fan of true crime in any form really, because I find that the genre of true crime, especially in recent years, seems to engage with an obsession and like a sort of morbid curiosity with the perpetrator of the crime rather than the victim. I don't think it seeks to understand why people commit crimes in any real sense of looking at like socioeconomic conditions and things. It just sort of dramatises a pretty horrible event and just talks about the most disturbing elements of it, like how gory the crime scene was and stuff like that. And what I'm much more interested in is looking into the socioeconomic factors that lead to a crime, having discussions about what we can do to prevent crimes happening rather than just imprison people once they've happened. And also, I am incredibly interested in centering the victim's story, not only to make it so that that person's legacy isn't just their last horrific moments, but also so that the surviving members of their family or their friends or their loved ones don't have to only hear about them in relation to their death. I think that's an awful thing, to minimise somebody's whole life to their murder. And so I avoid true crime in general, but the way this was described didn't sound like that. And like I said, I'm 40 pages in, and right now it feels like the sort of book I want to be reading. 2 young women were murdered in 1980 in West Virginia. They were going to something called the Rainbow Gathering Festival, and they were shot to death, and no one was convicted for a very long time. And then I think the people who were convicted, there was questions about whether they actually did it. And this is more a look into the area and how this crime affected the community. And so far, it's just been a really interesting introduction to this area and also to these 2 women. And it's really placed them in their historical context. It's a really interesting point it makes about the fact that they're sort of born just slightly in the wrong moment. They're not quite, for example, one of them has a baby very young that she doesn't keep, and at the time 80% of American women who had children out of wedlock gave them up for adoption, and within the next few years that dropped to like 20% because abortions became legal, and so they're born at this time when sexual freedom is starting to become slightly more of a thing, but like almost not soon enough for their generation. So I think this is a really interesting look at the time, and I'm hoping this will maintain this tone and not become, you know, exactly what I hate and all the things I just described. And the last two books are also non-fiction, and they're fairly new releases. One of them is a very new release. The first one is Ace, What Asexuality Reveals About Desire, Society and the Meaning of Sex by Angela Chen. I heard about this one when it first came out, but I hadn't heard many people review it. More recently, I've seen quite a few people review it and say what an amazingly informative book this is and how they're so glad they read it. Even in the blurb, it says that like you probably think if you know what the word asexuality means, you probably feel like you don't need to know any more, but this book will completely correct that belief. So I'm really excited to learn much more. I think the author is herself asexual, and so this book looks at her personal experiences of growing up asexual and how society viewed her, and then also delves into the broad spectrum of asexuality, and also I think how asexual people are viewed in society. There's like a lot of stigma attached to asexuality. And so yeah, I am very interested to read this one as soon as possible and return it as soon as possible, because I'm sure it's a book that lots of other people should be borrowing and would like to borrow. And this last one I definitely want to read very soon, because I should have featured this on an anticipated releases video. I somehow didn't know it was coming out, and then I stumbled across it the other day. I don't know how more people aren't talking about this, unless I'm just missing the conversation. This is by the author of Evicted, which came out a few years ago and was a wildly successful non-fiction book that I really enjoyed. And that author's new book is Poverty by America, which is a brilliant title, and that's by Matthew Desmond. So yeah, he won the Pulitzer Prize for Evicted. This is his newest non-fiction book that's just come out. So I want to read this very quickly and return it, because I'm sure there's a big wait list. When I heard about this, I immediately reserved it and didn't really look into what it was about, because I was like, I can pretty much tell from the title, and also he's one of those authors where I just read whatever he brought out. I think he might actually have some previous books, so I will try and look into those. But when I picked it up, it's really short. It's like 200 pages, and the font is really big. I don't know if you can tell that. So I'm a little bit worried, because it says, the author examines the nature of American poverty today and the stories we tell ourselves about it, spanning racism, social isolation, mass incarceration, the housing crisis, domestic violence, crack and opioid epidemics, welfare cuts, and more. Desmond argues that poverty does not result from a lack of resources or good policy ideas. We already know how to eliminate it. The hard part is getting more people to care. That just sounds like it's doing a lot in a very short space of time. So I'm now a little bit anxious, but I am very interested in this topic, and I'm hoping even if this is like a fairly broad overview, it will have some other books referenced that I can, go pick up if I want to learn more about certain sections. So yeah, let me know if you've read this one or if you intend to, because I know this will be a super popular non-fiction book in particular in the US. So yeah, those are all the books I currently have borrowed. Like I said, a lot of them are a bit shorter. I mean, a short book for me is something that's like less than 300 pages, and a lot of them are. So I'm hoping I will manage to bang through as many of these as possible in May, but I would appreciate your help. Let me know down below if you think there's any I should prioritise, any that you've read didn't work for you, and any that you would like to hear me talk about in particular. Let me know down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.